Hi everyone, welcome to Judicial Watch's weekly update here on social media. I'm Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton with the latest on the goings-on here in Washington, D.C. when it comes to government corruption and oversight. Judicial Watch is a nonprofit educational foundation that often sues the government to find out what it's up to and sues government officials to hold them accountable to the rule of law, which is a kind of a remarkable thing, unfortunately, nowadays here in Washington, D.C., but Judicial Watch is happy to do the work. A lot to talk about. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has rejected requests from Republicans in the Hill to appoint a special counsel. We have a new lawsuit that Judicial Watch has filed, I think 2 new lawsuits actually, over State Department USAID records about George Soros's operations abroad. Plus, there's a big Netflix controversy that your Judicial Watch got started about its hiring of Susan Rice to the board of directors. Again, Susan Rice, the Obama crony, on the board of directors of Netflix. So we'll be talking about the concerns about that and what Susan Rice's behavior is and what her record is. And that's why Netflix is getting some blowback on that. Plus, we've got some interesting news about a case that you may not pay much attention to, or an issue you may not pay not much attention to, but which is essential to the exercise of your franchise. That is gerrymandering, or the redistricting, or districting questions about how legislatures in the states create districts for members of Congress. Big controversy this week in the Supreme Court that, once again, Judicial Watch is in the middle of. First up is I think disappointing news is the best way I can put it, that I have about Attorney General Jeff Sessions deciding not to appoint a special counsel. And he's been asked to appoint a special counsel in a variety of matters, and in a letter he just sent out yesterday to the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee, he said, "I'm not appointing a special counsel." And this is the language he uses specifically. He cites the regulations as it relates to special counsels. Pursuant to Department of Justice regulations, the appointment of a special counsel by design is reserved for use in only the most extraordinary circumstances. And the public interest would be served by removing a large degree of responsibility for the matter from the Department of Justice. That would be the only reason, or that would be a reason to appoint a special counsel. The department has successfully investigated and prosecuted many high-profile, resource-intensive matters since the regulations were promulgated in 1999, but the regulations standard had been found to be satisfied on only 2 occasions. Guess what one of those occasions was? The appointment of the special counsel to investigate Donald Trump. He has, as been previously reported, had several federal prosecutors allegedly monitoring and reviewing the matters that are at issue here. And he named one of them for the first time yesterday, United States Attorney John Huber, who is a U.S. attorney originally appointed by Barack Obama, reappointed by President Trump, and he's based in Utah. So Jeff Sessions has said that Huber is going to be maybe working with the Inspector General, who has purview to investigate both criminal wrongdoing and violations of the rules by members of the Justice Department and the FBI, by agency employees. IG can't prosecute anyone. So supposedly Huber is going to be working hand in glove with the IG, but when you read the letter, it's pretty clear that Huber isn't charged with prosecuting anyone. He will review these matters. He will receive his recommendations. Sessions will receive his recommendations as to whether any matters not currently under investigation should be opened, whether any matters currently under investigation require further resources, or whether any matters merit the appointment of a special counsel. So I just spent a lot of time telling you that Jeff Sessions and the Attorney General's office and the United States Justice Department is not going to appoint a special counsel to investigate anything as it relates to what went on with the Obama FBI, Hillary Clinton, or anything of that nature. He's relying on this IG, which is an internal watchdog, and an outside prosecutor, who I don't think is an impaneled grand jury or doing a prosecution. He's just looking at the record and may suggest additional resources, and nothing's going to be done. Now, are there investigations going on? We don't know that, but I can tell you there's no public indication of any serious investigation by the Justice Department into the matters we care about. You see this with the Mueller operation. They've got 17 prosecutors, they've got a grand jury active, and witnesses going before the grand jury. It's hard to hide that from the American people. There's nothing preventing, by the way, the Justice Department from disclosing that they are investigating specific matters. And I got to take issue with the idea that there's nothing extraordinary about the circumstances we're facing that will require special counsel. Let's go through a few of these facts. James Comey, fired by Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, steals records, takes records that don't belong to him, these supposed memos he wrote. He leaks them, again, improperly and in violation of the law, through his friend to the New York Times with the hopes of getting a special counsel appointed. James Comey's number two, the number two person in the FBI, was just fired 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago by the Attorney General of the United States, Jeff Sessions, for lying repeatedly about his handling of a leak and his involvement in a leak related to the Clinton investigation. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Series of text messages have come out, despite the obstruction of the same Justice Department and FBI that Jeff Sessions tells us has a lot of integrity, that show that these two people, Peter Strzok being the lead investigator in the Clinton email matter and a top investigator as a counterintelligence specialist in the Russia-Trump investigation, were fervent anti-Trump partisans and pro-Hillary Clinton partisans. They talked about having an insurance policy targeting Donald Trump. They talked about, just most recently, it's disclosed just this past few days, that they were trying to cover their tracks as it relates to their communications and contacts with the White House and Congress, Democrats in Congress, to get this Trump investigation going. And on top of that, it turns out they were also trying to figure out a way to provide cover for, it looks like, inappropriate communications with the FISA court judge and the judge who recused himself from the General Flynn matter, Judge Contreras. Bruce Orr, the number 4 official at the Justice Department, had to be kicked out of his job as the senior person. He's moved back to his current position where I think he's overseeing, believe it or not, the organized crime division of the Justice Department's criminal division. His wife was working for Fusion GPS, and he was acting as a go-between between dirt from the Clinton campaign vendor Fusion GPS and the Justice Department and the FBI, even after the FBI supposedly cut Fusion GPS off and Christopher Steele off, Fusion GPS's foreign contact that was working with Russian intelligence to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. And then we have conclusions by the House Intelligence Committee that the FISA applications used to target the Trump team, signed off on by top leadership in the Obama administration and Jeff Sessions' number 2, Rod Rosenstein, held materially important information, which was that the basis of the applications for the FISA warrants and their subsequent renewals was based on this shady dossier funded with the Clinton campaign cash and DNC cash. Now, I have to say, that sounds all pretty extraordinary to me. Does it to you? So, it's been 2 years since that Clinton Lynch tarmac meeting. Still nothing out of the IG. And let me just say this about this IG report, because he also announced, the Inspector General for the Justice Department, that he's investigating this FISA issue. You can't investigate the FISA issue without investigating Robert Mueller. Pretty extraordinary, isn't it? So I have to say, it is disappointing. Jeff Sessions, I don't necessarily want to see fired. I do want to see him do his job. I want to see aggressive efforts to enforce the rule of law and clean house at the Justice Department and the FBI. And he's essentially saying, trust us. Trust the infrastructure at the FBI and Justice Department to clean its own house. We'll do these internal administrative reviews, not criminal, internal. Administrative, I mean. If there's anything criminal, we'll follow up on it, trust us. Well, you know, that's not sufficient. Peter Strzok is still at the FBI, as best I can tell. Andrew McCabe was only fired after months of agony out of the leadership of the DOJ and FBI. And not Peter McCabe, Andrew McCabe, the number 2. Robert Mueller still has this out-of-control investigation that has zero oversight, practically speaking, from representatives in the Justice Department who are accountable to the people. So there's a real rule of law crisis here. And, you know, I'm of two minds on special counsels, to be fair to General Sessions. I don't necessarily think we need a just special counsel to get justice. As I said before, we don't need new prosecutors, we need prosecutions. For instance, there's more than enough evidence to arrest Hillary Clinton. More than enough evidence. It was gathered largely by the compromised James Comey. He just didn't want to act on it, as the law would dictate. Repeated instances of the mishandling classified information, obstruction and lies and all of that. So we don't need a special prosecutor to redo that investigation. We just need someone to prosecute the case. Now, there would have to be a more substantive investigation of what was going on with the Obama Justice Department and FBI in terms of targeting Donald Trump. But all that General Sessions has agreed to do is to promise Congress he's got these folks, led by this Utah U.S. attorney, to investigate whether to investigate. No promise of any investigation, just the promise of a review and an investigation as to whether to investigate. James Comey says boo, and a special counsel is immediately appointed targeting Donald Trump for everything under the sun. He has his own personal special counsel that gets to look into anything they want under this Justice Department. We have these in-your-face violations of law by the Obama Justice Department and FBI and abuses of power. McCabe lying to investigators. And they're still talking about investigating a special counsel. So this to me is one big punt. I hope there's something going on I don't know about. But as I said, I don't know. I'm not aware of any public indications of a serious investigation into any of these matters. As I said, you'd see some evidence of that in the public. The Justice Department is not prohibited from talking about these things generally. And certainly, the deep state would be complaining if they were doing anything aggressive in terms of investigations and prosecutions. Now I'm told I'm not told, but supposedly read in reports there are 27 leak investigations. Let's hope something comes out of those. But the issue isn't Jeff Sessions' failure to appoint a special counsel. The issue is whether the Justice Department is going to aggressively prosecute and uphold the rule of law against powerful officials in the Obama Justice Department, the Obama FBI, the Obama White House, the Obama CIA, maybe the NSA, maybe the State Department. And whether there's going to be accountability for the Clinton criminality that Judicial Watch has proven, in my view, beyond a reasonable doubt. So in many ways, the special counsel is a distraction from the failure of the Justice Department to aggressively, in my view, prosecute these issues. So I can see why Donald Trump's upset. He's got his own personal special prosecutor that was appointed and is using a dossier created by the Clinton DNC. He's illicitly spied on. He had leaks targeted at him, and yet he's the one being harassed. And we have all this other information, and the leadership of the Justice Department couldn't find it in its heart to appoint at least a special, or how about a almost special prosecutor to investigate these issues. Instead, we're being told we should rely on a U.S. attorney in Utah to review these matters and figure out whether they're going to prosecute something. And it's now, what year are we now in? 2018? 15, 16 months into the new administration. And if you're aware of a big effort to clean up the corruption in the FBI and Justice Department, let me know about it, because I'm not aware of it. And what I am aware of is that this Justice Department and FBI have obstructed investigations into misconduct at the Justice Department and FBI. Ask the members of Congress who have been given the runaround on these struck page text messages. I've told you about all of our FOIA lawsuits that are obstructed repeatedly. The FBI's lied to Judicial Watch about records it has or did not have. So it's a mess, and I want Jeff Sessions to step up. I think he's doing great work on a lot of issues that the liberals hate him for, like on immigration, starting enforcing the rule of law without regard to race, as opposed to racially, the Obama Justice Department would apply the rule of law depending on race. The Justice Department here is applying the rule of law without regard to race, which is the way it's supposed to be. And Sessions is being attacked for that, for doing the right thing there. But there's this big gap in terms of this corruption and transparency. And both Sessions and FBI Director Wray need to step up and take this more seriously. So in the meantime, we'll keep on doing our work. We have over 30 lawsuits targeting the deep states of efforts to upend the results of the presidential election, or stop them, or change them before they happen, or intervene in the campaign. We've got all of our lawsuits about the Clinton emails. So if the Justice Department is going to do the job, we'll do it. But we can't prosecute anyone. And that's why people are so upset, because they see this criminality by individuals in positions of power, and it's darn near impossible to get prosecutions going. So I wish I had good news to report on this Good Friday, and wonderful, it's a Passover, so by the way, happy Easter, and as we celebrate Good Friday, it's always great to have Passover and Easter time together, so happy Passover to those of you who celebrate Passover as well. But I wish I had good news for you this week, but it's not great news. Justice Department is failing this essential job I think it's supposed to be doing. But we'll keep on fighting on your behalf. We're not, in many ways this isn't surprising to me. It's upsetting in the sense we hope for change and the change hasn't been substantial. But this is why Judicial Watch exists, because this is what we have to deal with all the time, from administration to administration to administration. And I hope the president, as he did with James Comey, takes stronger action to make sure the Justice Department and the FBI are doing their jobs. I really do. So maybe there's hope there. But in the meantime, we're just going to keep on putting the pressure for accountability and getting the truth out through our litigation. We're not going to wait for Congress to do it. We're not going to wait for the Justice Department and the FBI to own up to their own misconduct. We're just going to keep it up ourselves. So along those lines, a lot of you are concerned about what George Soros is up to. Now, George Soros is a very wealthy individual. I don't know his net worth, a billionaire plus. And he has massive influence on the American left and the transnational left because he has a lot of money and he's generous in terms of giving money through his open society organizations and foundations and other vehicles to left-wing interest groups. Here in the United States, he has a right to do that. Our concern is that tax dollars are subsidizing this Soros operation, both directly and indirectly. And we've sued repeatedly. Last year we sued over Soros activities as it relates to the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is a vehicle for providing grants to foreign organizations in Macedonia. And where else did we sue over? In Albania. Just this week we sued, this past week, we filed 2 new federal lawsuits against the State Department and USAID as it relates to Soros operations in Romania and Colombia. Now, as I said, George Soros is a billionaire. His groups don't need tax dollars to do their work advancing their left-wing agenda, don't you think? And we're also exposing that USAID and State Department are funding these far-left groups to undermine the non-progressive or non-liberal or non-socialist policies of governments abroad, like in Colombia, like in Albania, like in Romania, like in Macedonia. And we've highlighted, if you are a government that is skeptical of massive immigration, you want to control your borders, you're targeted by the Soros operation, who has its tentacles into the State Department. There's no doubt about that's what's going on. And you have to understand there's this transnational leftist movement. I mean, we see elements of it here in the domestic fights about amnesty and government rights versus individual rights, socialism. But it's much more significant in these countries abroad because a little bit goes a long way. A few $1 million here, $500,000 there can have a tremendous impact in a small country like Albania or Macedonia or in Colombia. Now, the damage in Central America is great from the Soros front groups because, I mean, we see in Venezuela where the direction of socialism is leading there, communism. And so they want to kind of get that movement ensconced further, because it's already ensconced too much, in these other countries. And why is that important to Americans? Well, A, it's your tax money. B, you destabilize these countries. Guess where people fleeing that destabilization are going to come to? America. We won't be able to build a wall high enough to stop the flood of economic and other political refugees from these countries when they're destabilized, courtesy of our own State Department and U.S. Agency for International Development and their Soros and other allies from the left. I see Rex Tillerson was fired by President Trump a few weeks ago. I mean, the State Department's been a disaster for Judicial Watch for years. They've been covering up the Clinton email scandal. They still are. Let's hope President Trump's new Secretary of State, was it Pompeo, is better. And there also continue to be vehicles for funding for these Soros operations. So that's why we've sued over these 4 countries. So now, to their credit, there are some members of the Senate who are concerned about this as well and have been pushing for information. For instance, the Trump nominee for ambassador to Colombia is being held up over this very issue because they're not getting these senators information about what's been going on in Colombia, which, as you know, or may know, has been riffed in the past by the drug trade, by this violent narco-terrorist left-wing group, FARC. So it's a serious issue, and someone's got to investigate it. So we can't FOIA George Soros. Those of you may want us to FOIA George Soros, but we can FOIA agencies that do business in lockstep with Mr. Soros and his Open Society foundations. So that's what we're doing. Thinking of an effective way to figure out what the government's up to and expose what I think is something that is of significance to the American people and to the world generally, which is this transnational effort to install left-wing values and policies, however radical and inimical to the U.S. interests in the long term and the interests of everyone else with your tax dollars. So we're pleased to be able to do the work. Other interesting news this week, and this is kind of one we kind of backed into. And what had happened was I had seen a tweet the other day that, I'm going to turn my phone on here, that Susan Rice was hired to join the board of directors of Netflix. And this comes after now Susan Rice was President Obama's national security advisor and was the ambassador to the United Nations under the Obama administration before she became national security advisor for President Obama. And my response to this was to tweet Netflix, and you can follow my Twitter feed at Tom Fitton, and then with Judicial Watch's Twitter feed is at Judicial Watch. So I tweeted, Netflix doubles down in support of Obama corruption, compromised Susan Rice, who lied repeatedly on both Benghazi and the unmasking issue, joins its board of directors. Well, you know, if you follow my Twitter feed, that's actually one of my softer tweets. I tend to be pretty direct. But the reaction was pretty strong, and a lot of people reacted by saying they're going to cancel their Netflix subscriptions. And the media picked up on it. Fox News picked up on it. One of the major news wires picked up on it about the controversy of Susan Rice joining the board of directors. And as I said, or maybe I didn't say, Netflix is also working with Barack Obama on some TV shows or documentaries or something of that nature. And it's, I think, interesting that Netflix thinks it's okay to hire Susan Rice in light of the controversies. Just think if a conservative figure implicated in all the wrongdoing that Susan Rice was doing was hired to join a major corporation. And I want to go over what Susan Rice is implicated in doing. She went on national television immediately after the Benghazi attacks, or 2 or so weeks after the Benghazi attacks, and lied repeatedly at the direction of the Obama White House. Judicial Watch proved that. She said that that Benghazi attack was the result of an internet video, a spontaneous protest, when in fact that she knew, and everyone in the Obama administration knew otherwise, that it was a terrorist attack directed at U.S. interests on the anniversary of 9/11. Killed our ambassador, 3 other innocents. So she lied repeatedly about this terrorism issue in order to make sure that Barack Obama was elected to the presidency, or re-elected to the presidency. Because remember, his campaign theme at the time was, one of his slogans, Osama bin Laden is dead and GM is alive. Well, that theme doesn't work that well if Al-Qaeda mounted a successful attack that killed a U.S. ambassador in the line of duty for the first time in 30 or 40 years. So they needed to cover it up, and Susan Rice was front and center. And rather than hold her accountable, Congress dithered, did nothing. And it wasn't until Judicial Watch exposed the White House involvement in these lies that they appointed a select committee to investigate Benghazi. And in the meantime, Obama shuffled her over to National Security Advisor, which leads to the other controversies, the unmaskings. She first said there were no unmaskings, and then she said there were. What are unmaskings? An American is picked up in foreign intelligence surveillance abroad. Typically, that American's name is made private unless there's need to know. And it looks like they had no need to know the names of Trump officials picked up in foreign surveillance abroad. But it looks like the Obama administration just unmasked their names anyway, because they recognized they could use the intelligence apparatus of the United States government, like a Google search, to figure out what the Trump team was up to in the run-up to the election. And then most recently, she's caught writing a CYA memo, I think even after, just as President Trump is inaugurated, takes the oath of office, describing a meeting 2 weeks earlier in which she and Obama and Joe Biden were there, I think James Comey too, talking about how to use the dossier and how the Russian investigation is going to go. And she wrote, President Obama said it has to be done by the book. So obviously a fake memo designed to cover their derrieres. When it came out that the Obama White House, as I discussed earlier, was orchestrating this effort to get Trump through illicit spying and other dubious activities. And this person gets a board seat on the board of Netflix. The left likes to talk about corporate responsibility. Is this corporate responsibility? Is Susan Rice going to write CYA memos for her work on Netflix? Is that what we can expect from the board of Netflix now, with Susan Rice on board? Well, this is why people reacted the way they did to my tweet, because they know all this. I'm happy to report it out to you, so in case you don't know it. But what I love about today's media culture, there's a lot not to love about it, is the liberal media can't keep this information away from you. And you often know as much as I do about the issues I just discussed. And you probably could have done the same thing I just did in terms of recounting all of the issues as it relates to Susan Rice. So I'm glad to see that people reacted strongly to this, because I haven't forgotten the Benghazi deaths. I mean, the lies about Benghazi is just, the subsequent lies are just one part of the scandal. The failure to go to the rescue of those men, putting them in harm's way, and then once the attack happened, not deploying assets. I don't care if it happened 50 years ago, I'm still going to be angry about it. And I'm not going to forget it, and we're going to keep on pushing for justice on it. So excuse me, Netflix, if I'm critical of you for bringing in someone who lied about a terrorist attack that killed 4 innocents and then has been implicated in misusing the government to spy on Americans. Not the best choice for a corporation that seeks to get money from everybody to watch movies and TV and everything. So we'll see what happens with Netflix. You know, my guess is they'll ignore us, but there are a bunch of people who are not going to like Netflix now or ever as a result of what they did with Susan Rice. And I'm sure their Obama work is going to be interesting in that regard too. So Netflix is a company to watch in terms of this major corporation subsidizing, as I said, doubling down on Obama corruption. So there was another case I want to talk to you about this week briefly, and I know I've been going on a little bit. There's something called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering is as old as the Republic in many respects. And under our constitutional system, state legislatures, based on census figures, can delineate the congressional districts. Now, as you might imagine, there's always controversy there. You can't do it based on race or other improper motives. And the question is, how partisan and how bad can the districts look in terms of the way, think of gerrymandering is based, I think, on, if my memory of history is correct, there was a Governor Jerry, or Gary as he was originally called, who came up with one of these districting schemes, and someone said that looks like a salamander, one of the districts. It was up in Massachusetts. And so they combined Gary and salamander to be gerrymandering. And President Ronald Reagan, it was always a cause of his to get better congressional districts, a better process for ensuring honest congressional districts. Now, Judicial Watch has been involved in this because Maryland is one of the worst congressional gerrymanders in the country right now. You can Google the congressional districts of district map of Maryland, and you'll see. Just think of the state of Maryland or just any other plain old state, and imagine a district starting in the far left corner and then snaking down to the furthest southern part of the state. It goes from the Maryland there's one district that goes from the Maryland Panhandle all the way down to just outside of DC. And other districts are just as bad. Even the Washington Post said the map mocks the idea that voting districts be compact and easily navigable. The 8 districts respect neither jurisdictional boundaries nor communities of interest. To protect incumbents for partisan advantage, the map has been sliced, diced, shuffled, and shattered, making districts resemble studies in cubism. It's rare that I agree with an editorial in the Washington Post. So Judicial Watch has tried to pursue and challenge that Maryland district map. We were unable to, but someone else has gotten at least to the Supreme Court. And that case was heard earlier this week, or at least the oral arguments took place. Separately, there's a debate in Wisconsin where the lower courts have decided because not enough Democrats have been elected, the districts must be improperly gerrymandered. So the question the courts have, and conservative jurists especially, they don't like to get the courts in the middle of this, what needs to be a legislative back and forth. There's nothing necessarily wrong with partisan advantage being enshrined in gerrymandering and in the creation of congressional districts. That's why you run to control state legislatures. That's the way the process is set out. But the question is, can it be so abusive that your rights are infringed under our Constitution? Is it so abusive, as we've said, that it turns into the politicians picking their voters as opposed to voters picking the politicians? So we think if the courts are going to get involved, there are ways to do it, and there are inappropriate ways to do it. And we filed an amicus brief with our amicus partners, oftentimes the Allied Educational Foundation, before the Supreme Court on this very issue. And we've highlighted that if the courts are going to get involved, they just need to figure out a way to make sure that they've got these rules that can be applied fairly across the board. Otherwise, judges are going to be making the congressional districts. And we know they can be as partisan as the state legislators. And there are basic rules that we put in, that we suggested, as the Post mentioned. Is the district compact? Does it follow the boundary of communities, counties, you name it? You know it when you see it in terms of a gerrymandered congressional district that's inappropriate. So the courts are grappling whether to kind of look at these issues again. And of course, to undo these districts just before the 2018 elections, or before elections generally, quickly, soon before elections generally, can be quite discombobulating to the process. So we're not asking for the courts to intervene every time there's a gerrymander, but we do know there are gerrymanders that require court intervention. And Judicial Watch has been virtually alone in highlighting a constitutional way that doesn't leave it to liberal or conservative judges to put the thumb on the scale. That's a neutral way of making sure that districts aren't getting out of hand in terms of this improper contortions that the state legislators make. In Maryland, what was interesting is there were a lot of black Democrats who were angry at the congressional redistricting, even though the Democratic Party ran the whole process. Because what was happening is that certain white Democrats were rejiggering the districts to make sure they would have protected status, to the detriment of some black elected representatives who weren't as senior or as important. So they would poach their voters to make sure they'd have more Democratic voters in their district. It's ugly. Gerrymandering hurts everyone. It hurts Republicans, it hurts Democrats, it hurts independents, it hurts voters. So it's an interesting case. I encourage you to learn more about it. Follow Judicial Watch's work on it, because it's a fundamental issue of election integrity. So this is what I love about Judicial Watch. We're not just doing FOIA work. We do these other things too, to protect the fundamental right to vote and to be self-governing on behalf of American voters. Anti-corruption isn't just suing the federal government. It means also protecting the rights of voters in the states from predations by the politicians they put into office. So with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful Easter and remaining Passover, and I'll see you next week here at Judicial Watch. Thank you.